Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
10 for 10 for the week ending June 22, 2024. Our first story comes to us from Bloomberg, which reports that a Spanish judge says the Spanish bank BBVA should face corporate spying charges and stand trial over a criminal inquiry. The national court judge said the bank and its ex-chairman should face a trial after completing an investigation that started in 2018. The judge considered the indications of crimes and revelation of secrets. Next up from the Wall Street Journal, the business section reports that Adidas has been made aware of allegations of bribery and corruption in its China business unit. They came to the company via a letter to the board of directors on June 7th, and the company says is now investigating the matter with the assistance of external legal counsel. A letter circulating on Chinese social media accused Adidas executives in China of receiving personal rebates from various marketing services providers in the country. The authors of the letter claim to be longtime Adidas employees in country. Next up, and just an absolutely insane story out of the United Kingdom, that it turns out that immediately before Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced his snap election for July 4th, a huge number of betting was done on the timing of the election. It was a look at a public analysis of market data. Apparently that information is publicly available in the United Kingdom, which has a much longer tradition of betting and open betting than here in the United States. The bets included thousands of pounds wagered before the May 22 announcement, when the odds implied a less than 25% chance of the election being called for July. And here's the crazy thing. It's all Conservative Party members, those who may have had inside knowledge. So I just cannot believe that party members would do something that stupid, but apparently they did. Next up from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, Mingi Sun reporting that Nigerian authorities have dropped the charges against two Binance executives, including a compliance executive of the cryptocurrency exchange who has been detained in the country since February. Nigeria's Federal Inland Revenue Service amended charges, dropping the tax evasion charges against Tigran Gambayaran, the firm's head of financial crime compliance, and Nadim Anyarwala, its regional manager for Africa. Binance is now the only defendant in the case, and Binance appointed an agent for service. And then finally, a lengthy story from the Wall Street Journal on corruption in the Houston Federal Bankruptcy Court involving Judge David Jones, who at least since 2017 had purchased a home with a lawyer who routinely brought cases before him, and she was paid millions of dollars in fees, as was her firm, Jackson & Walker, as was the national law firm, or indeed international law firm of Kirkland & Ellis. It's a huge scandal. The judge himself has resigned over this corruption scandal, and how it plays out will be very telling going forward. Our next story comes to us yet again from the Wall Street Journal. And this is a very unsettling story about a Major League Baseball umpire who is at the center of the latest sports gambling scandal. Pat Hoberg, who is such a good umpire, he's called Perfect Pat, is now charged with, or at least alleged to have bet on baseball games. And the league wouldn't reveal the specifics of his punishment or the exact nature of his offense, but actually they didn't find any games he worked in were compromised or regulated, but he has run afoul of Major League Baseball betting regulations. You just can't have this for a umpire. Next, yet another story from the Wall Street Journal, this time Risk and Compliance Journal. David Smagala reporting that a Swiss or subsidiary of the Swiss commodities trading company Trafigura has agreed to pay a $55 million settlement to the CFTC for its first ever penalty against companies for impeding reports by whistleblowers. Between 2017 and 2020, the Houston-based trading company, or at least the U.S.-based component of it, made the current and former employees sign employment and separation agreements with provisions stopping them from disclosing company information, but it did not include an exception for communicating with law enforcement agencies or regulators in violation of the law. This retaliation case is the first one from the CFTC. Next up, from Reuters, China's President Xi Jinping said there were deep-seated corruption issues in the Chinese military. So he will continue his purge of the Chinese military. You would normally be very much in favor of all purges of corruption, although every time China involves in something, you have to look at the backstory and the role of the Chinese Communist Party. But he believes there's corruption in the army, and he's going to go after it. Our next story is from Forbes, which says the G in ESG is the key to fighting corruption. When discussing ESG, the emphasis often will fall on the E or perhaps the S. However, G seldom receives the attention it deserves. This oversight is significant because corruption is a key governance issue and poses substantial risks. Directors and companies face significant liabilities for failures in this area. Now, this is Forbes. This is not some compliance journal. This is not a typical place you would see a business journalist talking about the G in ESG and why it is so critical going forward. So I was really pleased to see this article in Forbes, and I hope you will. It's a very short article, but hopefully it will help you going forward. And our final story comes to us, our final story from the Wall Street Journal. This is from the business section. Andrew Tangle and Dave Michaels reporting on the DOJ's decision they're going to have to come to on whether or not to prosecute Boeing. So will the DOJ prosecute them? The survivors of the families of the 737 MAX crashes hope so. As I mentioned at the start of the podcast, the sponsor of this podcast for this month is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. Check out the website and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.